So thank you everyone for joining to listen to me today. I'll just introduce myself. My name is Peter Rising. I'm a four-time Microsoft MVP in various fields, my M365, security, and I'm also the EMEA cybersecurity practice lead at Fortune 500 company called Insight, where I've been for about a year and a half now. I've worked in IT most of my adult life, starting in the early to mid 90s, and mainly with Microsoft technologies. And the last sort of 10 or 15 years or so now, I'm guessing more in the cloud space and Microsoft 365 coming into play, where in recent years I've specialized more and more in cybersecurity. So what I want to talk about is AI is everywhere at the moment. It's hard to avoid. It's impossible to avoid, and all too easy to adopt. But securing your organization's data in the AI era is something that is often overlooked. And I want to share with you just why it's important not to do so and what you can do about it. And we'll start with the fact that when you think about it, data is the lifeblood of any organization. And with modern cloud technology like Microsoft 365, it is available anywhere, in the office, at home, on the move, in your Starbucks with dodgy Wi-Fi, which you should try and avoid at all costs if you're doing anything sensitive. Accessible on a range of devices, on PCs and MacBooks and all smartphones, tablets. There may be business issued devices with controls. There might be bring your own device, which are less controlled in some circumstances, but hopefully are managed in some way. And that data will inevitably include sensitive and confidential data such as personal information, financial, perhaps medical, intellectual property, and so on and so forth. And data massively relevant in this modern world. But what is the risk of that data being so accessible and out there in the cloud, on places like OneDrive and Teams and SharePoint and perhaps even Azure Files and that sort of thing? What is the risk? Well, one thing that you might not realize, many organizations don't realize, is that with the Microsoft shared responsibility model, the responsibility for that information and data is always with the customer. Now, this little graphic on the top right there shows the different responsibilities in that model, and the light blue is completely Microsoft responsibility. The shared is the mixture of those colors, and the customer is the dark blue. And information and data right at the top there across all variations of software as a service, platform as a service, infrastructure as a service, and on premises, always the customer's responsibility. And attackers, those malicious actors out there, those nefarious bad guys, and there are many of them, they want your data for all sorts of nefarious purposes. They want to get a hold of it. They want to breach your identities and your vulnerable devices and get at your data. That's their ultimate goal, to encrypt it so they can sell it and ransom it and all sorts of nasty stuff. And data plus people equals risk. This is a little formula I've come up with. And that translates for me into, in the modern world, data plus people plus generative AI minus data protection and governance equals disaster. And it really does mean that, unless you are diligently and properly prepared. So what's the potential impact of all this? What does this mean in real terms? What could happen? Well, we could be looking at data breaches, where your data is compromised through weak points in your identities and your endpoints and your data protection and governance controls. And you could be looking at data loss. Your data could be lost or exfiltrated, stolen. And you could be impacted by the dreaded ransomware, where malicious actors will encrypt your data and make it unavailable to you. And they will ask for a payment to release it, to either release it back to you or to not release it out into the nasty old dark web and put it online. And this all can lead to loss of productivity, damage to your reputation, significant fines, and other penalties, leading to some very, very worried executives that you can see around the table there with some looming figures behind them. And this is because many, many C-level executives now potentially don't realize this, but they can be held criminally accountable for not putting in proper, effective data governance and protection controls. And that's the only one part of it. Those 3 bullet points at the bottom there are key to this. The loss of productivity. Imagine a manufacturing company that's the sort where I used to work, where they were reliant on their end-to-end process of a client booking in an order. So if they can't get at their systems and their data, if that's all compromised, they can't book in orders and purchase orders. They can't process that through all the way through to their warehouse, where they might have to pick it with one of those laser guns and scan it and put it on a pallet, and out it goes. They can't ship. That's going to lead to damage to reputation, which is going to leave competitors rubbing their hands together with glee, trying to steal customers. So massive, massive impact. So what can you do about this? Well, these are 4 steps that Microsoft have on their learn.microsoft.com pages, which I highly recommend you check out if you don't already use that website. It's an absolute goldmine of information. The first step is to know your data, and a lot of organizations don't know what data they've got, how much there is, where it is, and what type of data it is. And it's important to understand your data landscape and identify that important data across your hybrid environments. Is it on premises? Is it in cloud? Is it in controlled cloud? Or are there elements of shadow IT going on? Are people putting stuff in Dropboxes and all sorts of stuff like that? So identifying that data is crucial. Secondly, protecting that data once you've identified it. So applying protection controls like encryption, access restrictions and permissions, and visual markings like headers, footers, watermarks, to ensure that only those who are authorized to consume and change that data and manage that data can do so. The third one is to prevent data loss, and that involves policies for DLP, or data loss prevention, to detect risky behavior and prevent accidental oversharing of sensitive information. So examples of that would be a user sat at their desk using their email. They might be typing an email or working on a Word document or a spreadsheet, and they might type in a national insurance number in the UK here, or a credit card number. And data loss prevention policies will know to look for that in users' documents and emails and so on. And they will pop up with policy tips saying, no, you might not want to do this. Or they might be even more restrictive and say, actually, no, I'm going to totally block you from doing this. This is not something we're going to allow you to do. So data loss prevention policies can speak to that. And finally, governing that data is massively important. And that involves retaining and, just as importantly, deleting data in a compliant manner. So with things like GDPR having been around for a good few years now, and other regulatory standards, making sure you retain data for periods of time that ensure you comply with industry regulations for your particular sector or any internal policies that you have is crucially important. And a lot of mistakes that, one of the mistakes that a lot of organizations make in regard to that is over retaining, though. A lot of them will say, well, we'll keep everything forever, which is a disastrous decision, because you can actually find yourself in trouble for over retaining as well. So a robust and effective and appropriate retention and deletion policy is critical to that process. So this is what you can do, but how can you do it? Well, the technology that Microsoft offer for this is called Microsoft Purview, and it falls into the acronym of SCI, Security, Compliance, Identity, with the C in the middle being very much the compliance piece. And we'll talk a little bit more about what the others mean a little bit later in our section where we get into defense in depth. But what Purview speaks to is data security, to secure that data across its life cycle, wherever it may live. And there are some technologies listed in that first green column there that speak to that. Data loss prevention, we've already spoken about. Insider risk management is kind of an extension of that, data loss prevention, but that speaks to specifically the insider risk, whether that be a malicious insider or an unwitting insider. And what I mean by that is an employee in an organization who inadvertently risks information that is sensitive or deliberately does so. And a good example of that would be somebody leaving an organization. Imagine a salesperson leaving for a new job, and he or she or they decide to take some intellectual property with them. Insider risk management policies can detect and alert and prevent that. So these are the sort of things that can help with security. Information protection in the form of encryption, labeling, making sure that labels are appropriately labeled with general consumption, public, personal content, confidential, highly confidential. They can be labeled as needed with appropriate permissions and encryption, with watermarks, headers, footers, and so on. And finally, adaptive protection, which is a relatively new feature of data security in Microsoft Purview, where the protection features will adapt based on certain criteria that you enter into user objects within what is commonly still known as Azure Active Directory, but should be called Microsoft Entra ID these days, where user objects can be tagged with certain attributes, like a department name, for example. So if this user is in this department, then apply this policy to them, which can adapt in terms of their risk level and so on and so forth. So that's data security. Purview also can speak to data governance to seamlessly empower your organization to govern that data, and that is across a data map, a data catalog, and data estate insights across unstructured and structured data. Now, this is kind of a recent development where what was previously known as Microsoft Purview came together and merged with what was known more as Azure Purview, and that data map or data catalog refers to more to things like SQL databases, Azure Synapse, Cosmos, AWS content, that sort of thing. So we've now got that ability in a unified portal with Microsoft Purview to govern and protect those schematized assets as well. And then finally, we have our risk and compliance posture, where we can do things like use Compliance Manager, where we can have assessments that we can run against certain industry standards like ISO 27001, for example, or NIS2, which is an EU one that's very relevant at the moment, and apply standards across our Microsoft environment specifically for those controls. E-discovery and audit, very, very crucial tools to use for things like internal investigations, legal investigations, data subject rights requests, where you need to interrogate what you're holding in terms of data in your organization and then report on that, export that data, redact it, provide it as required. Data lifecycle management to retain and delete that data, and marking items as records as well. So that is Purview, and that is the technology which we use to speak to these requirements to protect and govern our data. But next, how does this all specifically relate to the era of AI? And here's an example, and I'll show a couple of examples in the next few slides. So Microsoft Copilot is Microsoft's own range of generative AI products. So you have Microsoft Copilot on the web, which was formerly known as Bing Chat Enterprise. So that's like, for me, that's replaced my search engine. I couldn't tell you the last time I used Google. I go to Copilot on the web each time I want to do a search, and I just find it gives me much better results. And in that context, on Copilot in your Microsoft 365 environments, that is not used to train the model, and that can be configured with protection to prevent sensitive data leak, and it's private to your organization, it's grounded in your Microsoft 365 tenant. This example here speaks more to Chat GPT. So in this scenario, a high-risk user leaks some sensitive data to a consumer AI app. So imagine they've got some sensitive data in a spreadsheet or a Word doc or wherever, and they copy it, they paste it into Chat GPT in the form of a question, probably quite innocently. They may not be doing it for nefarious purposes, but that's out there now. That's in the big wide world. It's not contained or grounded within your environment. You lose control of that data. Purview can help address that by gaining visibility into prompts containing sensitive data and user risk context with a feature called AI Hub, which is in Microsoft Purview. That's still in preview at the moment, but it's absolutely brilliant, and it can give you a good pane of glass to look at these sort of things. What it can do in response to that is create a policy in data loss prevention and endpoint, specifically DLP. So endpoint DLP refers to DLP on devices that are used, and that's going to help to prevent that sensitive data from being copied and pasted or uploaded to AI apps with DLP policies. And then what we can do is we can make that DL policy user risk adaptive. And that speaks to that adaptive protection that I was talking to in the last slide, where based on that user being set in a certain department, then that department can be tagged in a policy for certain levels of risk, and those policies can then work to not block legitimate business activities, but make sure that anything risky can be prevented. That data leak incident can be prevented as a high-risk user can be identified in these policies and then can't copy and paste or upload that sensitive data to ChatGPT. While low-risk users identified can continue using the app if it's authorized by the company. So that's a great example of how AI is something that really needs to be tied into data protection and data governance right from the get-go. Another one that I really enjoy pointing out is one of my favorite features of Microsoft Purview, which is eDiscovery, specifically eDiscovery Premium, which is the top tier version of that. And here we can see a screenshot of what is called a collection, which is basically a search. And you can search across your Microsoft 365 locations for specific data or specific filters and queries and that sort of thing. But now, as you can see on the checkbox on the right side of that screenshot, you can use it to search in the query builder for Copilot interactions, which is absolutely brilliant. And you'll see here in the list of results on this slide, it shows the Copilot little icon there just next to each number on the right, showing exactly what that was. And if you highlight one, as we got number 6 highlighted there, it shows exactly what happened there when that particular user asked within Microsoft Word, so Copilot in Word, they asked for a summary. Summarize this doc is what the user is saying in the purple bit at the top there, just there. And then Copilot does that for them. And eDiscovery can go back and search for and report on that, and you've got visibility of exactly what was done there. So this is really cool stuff. Equally, there's another Copilot product, which has not been out quite as long as Copilot for Microsoft 365, which is called Copilot for Security. And this is surfaced in some of the tools for security, compliance, and identity, like Microsoft Purview, but equally in things like Microsoft Defender and Microsoft Entra for identity. This next slide is more of a moving slide. It's got some video content in it, but no sound. And this one shows you eDiscovery again, Security Copilot on the right, and it asks to summarize that particular entry and identify the key participant, and it does that, and then it goes on to tag that particular response as appropriate. So, and it's just playing again if so quick you wanted to take another look at that. So that's the power of these Copilot features within these Microsoft security, compliance, and identity technologies. So that's just setting the scene for just a small fraction of what these technologies can do. We've barely scratched the surface. But what I do want to point out here, and this is not even necessarily in the scope of AI, this is in general principles of what I feel any organization should be looking to do in terms of protecting and governing data. If you do nothing else, this is what I always say you must do, what all organizations should be doing. First column, data loss prevention, DLP policies. You must look to detect sensitive content in your organization, provide user guidance on how to deal with that sort of thing, block sharing of sensitive information, and make sure that appropriate alerting to administrators is set up. Sensitivity labels, it's a very, very good idea to set up labels so content can be labeled either manually or automatically, depending on licensing. I'm sure you're all quite familiar with E3 licensing versus E5 licensing. You're going to get more features with E5, obviously paying more money for that license. And the distinct difference between the features available in Purview and other security and compliance products is that at the E5 level, you can do a lot more with automation. You can automatically apply encryption and labels and DLP policies, whereas E3, for example, with sensitivity labels, you're relying on the user to explicitly go and assign that label. Whereas with E5, you can configure it based on certain sensitive content. If detected, it gets this label. But definitely these labels should be rolled out in an organization if you are using Microsoft 365 technologies on E3 or E5. Data lifecycle management, all about retaining and deleting content. This is hugely important. The first two columns there are very relevant to AI. The third one on the right, not so much, but it's something that is absolutely crucial to any rollout of Microsoft Purview for data control in an organization. So that is always my go-to recommendation. What are the key success factors for this? How do you roll this out with the least pain and the most success, the least friction? Number one, it's important to identify the correct stakeholders in any organization. Compliance is not just an IT problem. It's very much a team sport. That is usually problem number one, and that it's perceived in many organizations as something that the IT function will do. And the real stakeholders who should be part of that responsibility often don't want to get dragged kicking and screaming involved in it. That like data protection officers or whatever it's called in any particular organization. They might have one organization's this is another organization's that. So there's no consistency of definitions, which also doesn't help sometimes. But it's definitely not just an IT problem. That's why leadership buy-in is also crucial, because those leaders need to sponsor that at an executive level, and they need to enforce the participation of all those stakeholders across the business. Understanding and identifying that data. If you try and go and just put these controls in place without understanding that, without knowing where the data is and knowing what it is, what its format is, then that's just setting up for not succeeding, setting up for failure. In protecting and governing that data, it's crucial to define champions groups. So these would be individuals who could be part of that first phase of a pilot or a proof of concept, who will evangelize it to those who come to it later when it's rolled out more widely. They can talk to, the next step in terms of the communication strategy. They can talk about the why, the how, and the when. And in those champions groups, I always say it's good to involve a cross-section of people from across the organization, from all disciplines, but equally it's good to have allies to these sort of processes, the sort of folks who any organization will have these, who are IT hobbyists, if you like, to see themselves as IT experts, even though it's not their job. So get them, they're going to be allies to you straight away. They're the ones that are going to sit in the canteen at lunchtime and talk to colleagues or across Teams meetings and say, hey, have you heard about this new feature? Whereas that sort of thing coming from the IT function is quite often, not interested in this. But so if you can get a cross section of champions, that is going to be absolutely wonderful. And that clear communication strategy of why this is happening, how it's happening, where it's happening, what the impact is to the end users is absolutely essential. So this is all about adoption and change, training and education. If you want your users to buy into this story on day one when this is implemented and rolled out, and they know what they're doing, they know what to expect and when, then that's going to be the difference between success or disaster. It's equally important to think about backup in this scenario. Now, since Microsoft 365 has been around, which is a good long while now, I think 2011 or thereabouts is its genesis. There's often been this misconception about how backup works within the product, and up until recent times, there hasn't been a native backup solution within Microsoft 365. There are plenty third-party solutions out there, such as Veeam and Druva and others. There's many out there. Symantec, I think, do one. So there are options out there. There's been a perception that certain features within Microsoft 365, such as version control on things like SharePoint document libraries, where you can get autosave as you're typing your document. You may be familiar with that. You're typing and it autosaves it for you. And each time it autosaves, it creates a version, a 1.0 or 1.1 or 1.2. And you can restore those versions if you make a mistake and you want to get back to an earlier version of the document. That is quite often perceived by some organizations as well, that's kind of a backup, but it really isn't and shouldn't be. Equally, retention policies, which will retain a copy of a file in the event that a user deletes it. They'll copy it elsewhere and retain that, and the user has no visibility of that. That's often perceived as this sort of functionality as well, but it's really not the same thing. And depending on your obligations and your industry regulations and internal policies, it's very, very important to think about, do I need a backup in my environment? And more of my clients over the last few years have actually coming back to backups in Microsoft 365. So Microsoft do have their own version of this now, Microsoft 365 Backup. It's just out of preview. In my own view, it's not quite mature yet that it could dislodge any of the third-party industry players, but it's getting there. Microsoft always get there with these things. As an example, 5 or 6 years ago, Microsoft were probably not taken seriously as a security organization, whereas that is not the case now. They are firmly in that top right Gartner Magic Quadrant, and they are pretty much the only vendor out there who can tell an end-to-end security story, which makes putting all your eggs in one basket less of a concern, to me anyway, than in the past. There's still a 50-50 split, I would say, of opinions on that, depending on who you talk to. But definitely think about that backup story. So that sort of takes us to the end of the story in terms of Microsoft Purview and data. But I don't want to end there. I just want to get across to everyone the importance of defense in depth and bolstering your data security. That's your data protection and governance that we've just been talking about, with equally robust endpoint. So that's your devices that you have, your PCs, your MacBooks, your mobile devices, and your identity protection, which is your logins, which need to have strong passwords and hopefully multi-factor authentication and other security controls. These are crucial to the process as well. And all too often, organizations will come to an organization like mine and say, we want to do this. We want to do a specific part of security, compliance, identity management, or privacy. And they're not thinking of that wider strategic picture. So I'll show you a little jigsaw here that illustrates that what we've looked at so far, Microsoft Purview, is only one piece of that Microsoft security jigsaw. So I always like to define cybersecurity as the top level of this jigsaw, and then we can have pillars which comprise of security, compliance, identity management, and well, privacy is sort of bundled into compliance as well. And you can also add SecOps into there, security operations, which relates to managed services for security, where organizations will outsource that security to organizations like Insight, where I work, where we have our own managed SOC based on Microsoft Sentinel. So mapping these pillars and these labels here to products is quite simple, actually. And for security, you can read anything that has Microsoft Defender as a name attached to it. So Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, Defender for Identity, Defender for Servers, Internet of Things. There's a Defender for quite a cloud apps, for quite a lot of things these days. And this is how you protect and secure lots of things across your Microsoft 365 canvas. Compliance is all about Microsoft Purview, which is what we've talked about so far. And we'll illustrate a little bit more about that as we build out this jigsaw. Identity is Microsoft Entra, and probably more commonly known in recent years as Azure Active Directory, but should now be called Microsoft Entra ID. And what that is, it's essentially a database of users and groups and the security that's wrapped around them. Historically, I mean, if you've been around in IT as long as I have, it all started with completely on-premises, with Active Directory on-premises, which is still around today with hybrid environments that synchronize that on-premises Active Directory into the cloud in Microsoft 365. Securing those identities with strong controls is absolutely crucial. If you do nothing else there, at least do MFA. It's actually really, really scary how many organizations still aren't doing that, though. Management of your devices, your endpoints with something like Microsoft Intune is also crucial. What sort of policies and settings are pushed down to those devices to control and manage them. And security operations, in the Microsoft world, that would be Microsoft Sentinel, which is a SIEM tool, security, information, and event management, where alerts are gathered from all of these other things, from Defender, from Purview, from Entra, from Intune, and from other sources, non-Microsoft as well, and put into a Sentinel environment in a log analytics workspace, and then they can be managed either in-house if you have an internal security team, or by a managed service provider like Insight, where I work. So just a reminder, though, and just to illustrate to you just how complex this can be, when you put it all together, Purview consists of information governance, information protection, which consists of things like DLP, the sensitivity labels, the data lifecycle management and records management. So this blue section here sort of builds this out, and the same principles apply with all of these other green ones in this column here. So there's a lot to think about. So that tells us that data protection and governance alone really is not enough. And we have our character here. We've got our data protection manager or officer here, and she's looking very happy with herself because she's got her clipboard with data protection, data governance all checked off. She's done her job, but actually not really, because behind her there's a door with unprotected identities and endpoints behind her, and robust identity and access protection controls are not in place, and endpoint devices are not secured and protected. So what's the solution to that? Well, it's all about the fact that cybersecurity is a team sport. You need to get these disciplines together. You need your security, your compliance, your identity teams, your endpoint protection teams all together to work on your cybersecurity as a whole strategy. And there are a number of roles and functions that can and should be involved in this, and some of them are listed on this page here. And that's by no means an exhaustive list. You could involve even wider disciplines in that, like HR teams, for example, who would have a say in data privacy and that sort of thing. So cannot overestimate or overstate enough how important it is to get the right people working together on that strategy. And it's all because I always use this analogy. I really like this one. I like to think of Microsoft 365 as a platform. It's like essentially having a large box of Lego bricks, and no two organizations are going to build the same thing, and no single organization will use all the bricks. What you build isn't going to stay the same over time. Bullies are probably going to try and knock down what you've built and steal some of your bricks. Those are those bad actors out there, those bad guys who are lurking and trying to find weaknesses in what you've put together. There are some best practices and guidelines, so your instruction manual for your Lego, but without experienced help, it can be daunting putting the bricks together. And if that sounds a little bit cheesy of an analogy, and it kind of is, and you don't believe me there, well, take a look at this. This is actually what the bricks look like when they all come together. And that just looks super daunting, even to me, when you look at it in this format. When you can see your security analytics up here with Microsoft Defender XDR, extended detection and response, which comprises of Defender for endpoint for your devices, Office 365 for your email security. So all of your links in your emails are safe to click on, for identity, for any cloud applications you have. Entra for your identity requirements, conditional access, which is, if I describe conditional access to people, the most basic form of conditional access is actually MFA, multi-factor authentication, which is the principle of if this happens, then do that. So if a user logs in from this location on this device, then allow them, but require multi-factor authentication or block them, or so on and so forth. So we can see all across here different things working together, and they really do all come together to make that secure, hardened, robust, complete cybersecurity posture. And this is a Microsoft diagram. This is from the Microsoft Cybersecurity Reference Architectures, which is freely available for anyone to go and search for and download. It's an exhaustive set of slides. It's about 100+ slides. But if you're interested in this and want to know more, I highly, and it's free to get, I encourage you to go and download it and take a look through. It's really fascinating to see how they put all this together, and how everything, when data security is what we're talking about mainly here with DLP and information protection with sensitivity labels, all should be working together to tell that story. So here on the next slide, this just breaks it down a little more. This shows us the various, this shows us Microsoft Defender XDR and all the products that come together to make that up. So, and I just described some of this before we got to it actually, but Defender for 365 prevents from things like phishing and URL protection, Defender for Internet of Things and operational technology, so device exploitation in those environments. So all sorts of operational technology out there now. I think that's going to explode even more in the next few coming years. Protecting devices and things being exploited on them and installed on them, and control being taken from them. Defender for Identity, where the protection of the cloud can be extended onto your server environment that you may still have in your hybrid identities. Defender for Cloud Apps. And then, although this is Defender XDR, there is links to things like Entra here and Purview, Insider Risk Management as well. So this actually simplifies what was on the last slide, but there's still a lot going on in these blocks for sure. But this is why it's massively important in any organization to have the right resources in place, either in-house or outsourced. The Entra product family for identities is all about establishing zero trust access controls for your identities. So zero trust, the three main principles of that are always assume you've been breached, always authenticate specifically, and always assume breach, explicitly authenticate, and I always forget the third one. It'll come back to me. I should have it written down. Assume breach. Yeah, it'll come back to me. But all about securing access for your employees with a range of technologies such as intranet access, which is basically the next evolution of VPN technology, ID governance, ID protection, external identities coming into your organization. So allowing external parties like customers or vendors or suppliers to have access to your environment, and secure access in any cloud as well. And Copilot for Security can go across all of these things, where you can use that prompt with natural language to analyze things and get instant replies. And then Intune to protect those devices across the apps that are on them, the identities that they use to connect, and the actual devices themselves with compliance policies and bring your own device and organizational owned devices as well. So all tied into things with different configuration, like self-service to set them up, remote and hybrid workers, reporting, integration, endpoint security, zero trust there again, bringing everything together. And then finally, an equally daunting slide here. This shows you this is the reference architecture for a Microsoft Sentinel based environment for a security operations center, where signals are being brought in across multiple areas, and then they can be analyzed across different areas of identity and OT and IoT, platform as a service, infrastructure and apps and applications, endpoint and mobile, all brought together and analyzed and processed, and then reported back and dealt with, triaged and processed. So that is something that is becoming more and more relevant. I think it's one of the things that even in these more recently constricted times of budget being a struggle for many organizations, and with the way the economy is, that it's almost immune to those restrictions, because it's so crucial to have this sort of technology in place now. So very, very much something that most organizations should be thinking about, that security incident and event management, which again ties into Copilot for security, machine learning, AI, behavioral analytics, all that sort of good stuff. With that all having been said, our story about Purview specifically and how that ties into AI and explaining the principles of defense in depth, what would I want you to take away from this? What would be the call to action if this is applicable to you in your story, and you're thinking about getting AI rolled out in your organization? Well, before rolling out Copilot or anything else like it, prepare your data for AI. Make sure it is properly identified. You know what it is, where it is, how it's protected. Assemble the appropriate stakeholders. Make sure you get the right people involved. Define your champions groups. Do a proof of concept and or pilot, test, refine until it's ready to be released into production. Make sure you have adoption and change involved in the process. That is going to be key to the success of any rollout of technology that ultimately will make lives easier, and is very, very simple in those terms, but is so complex behind the scenes of what it actually does. Train your staff, make sure they're confident and comfortable with it from day one. And do remember defense in depth as well, because that is absolutely crucial. It's if you have well-protected data in your environment, but your identity is not, posture is not robust, and you have vulnerable devices, attackers will find ways through those defenses. And if they're in your environment, your data might be reasonably well protected, but it might not be invulnerable. So always think about that belt and braces approach. That will set you in good stead. So that's the end of my talk, and I'll welcome some questions and discussion in a moment. But before we do, just some links there and I'll share this deck with Sarah, so you can get it. You can connect on me with LinkedIn if you'd like to, and I'm always happy to engage with people on there. I have my YouTube channel, which I'm very, very active on, and I'm approaching 10,000 subscribers. So if you want to check me out and give me a subscribe, I'll be very grateful. And that's my Amazon author page there as well, where I have some books on exam guides and security administration as well, which feel free to check out. But that leads us into questions. So I will stop sharing my screen, and we can have a little chat. So thank you so much for listening, and I hope that was informative. Okay,
very informative. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hands are up already, so I'll put out.
Soti, I think you had one.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Peter. Really appreciate that. That topic promised could be remarkably dull for someone who's not into it, but you made it very interesting, actually.
Oh, thank you.
But my question is linked to. So, okay, I've worked in big organizations where we had a data governance team. I was looking after the Power BI infrastructure, so I was working with them, so I know Purview. We even went to Elation, so I get that from a big organization. What I'm struggling to understand is, so if you're a small organization and you want to do something with security, like how could you start? Like how big an organization, or how how many people before you think, right, we need to do this seriously, and you don't have security staff or you've got a couple of people in IT maybe, but you want to use Copilot. Essentially, that's what, some small organizations will be like, well, okay, we're, I don't know, 15 people, or maybe we're 30 people, 50 people. We don't have a big IT, but we want to use Copilot. Like, what can you basically do apart from put two-factor authentication? What else could you do? Does that make sense?
Yes, it does very much so. And MFA always should be step number one. It's security 101. And beyond that, in that sort of situation where you don't perhaps have the resources and the person power, then I always guide people towards some very, very easy to follow and easy to implement steps, which is in the Microsoft Defender portal, security.microsoft.com. There is a secure score section in there where it shows you your current score for how you are protected in your environment right now and the steps you need to do to improve that score. I will say never look to get that to 100% because it's an impossible challenge. It should be more about making that as effective as you can, because it's a moving target. Things are changing all the time. But look to see what the areas of most need are, and you can filter by that in what it's suggesting for you and the controls and protection you can put in place. Equally within the Purview portal, which you can get at purview.microsoft.com for the data stuff, there's a compliance score in there as well, which you can do the same on. And that is particularly good for data specifically because you can filter that by certain industry regulations. There are a ton of industry regulation types in there that you can filter on, like ISO 27001, and I think there's GDPR stuff in there as well. There's HIPAA for the United States and PCI, all sorts of good stuff. So start there, definitely, with those secure scores and compliance scores, and make sure that you've got the basics covered. If you're even sort of earlier than that, if as an example, if you're a born in the cloud startup business right now and you set up a brand new cloud only Microsoft tenant, then a brand new tenant these days will come with the security basics already configured, which put these the bare minimum of controls in. Now, most organizations who know what they're doing will turn those off immediately in favor of putting their own controls in. But those are a couple of examples of things you can do. If you've not got the teams internally, then there's always options that you can do. You can come to a provider such as Insight, who can help guide you to Microsoft funding potentially. There are lots of funded workshops that you may or may not be eligible for, things like ESIF funding, things like I've changed the name of this so often, but it was the Microsoft Cloud Accelerator initiatives for threat protection workshops, data security workshops, that sort of thing. There's always ways and means that you can engage with Microsoft partners or Microsoft themselves, who can steer you towards services like Fast Track as well. So lots of avenues.
Geez, thank you. Sorry, did you say check out the Microsoft Defender portal, did you say earlier?
Yes, which is accessible at security.microsoft.com. You will only be able to get access to that if you have the appropriate permissions, such as a security administrator or a security reader. So if you don't already have that, you'd have to talk to your existing person who controls that to be able to look at that with the appropriate level of permissions.
Cheers. Thank you, Peter.
It's a pleasure. Any more for any more? Okay. Well, wonderful. Well, I do thank you so much for listening to me today, and I appreciate you inviting me, Sarah. I've really enjoyed it. And thank you very much for saying that I made it interesting, because I'm always very aware that this can be a very dry subject, but it's become easier to talk about in recent times with the explosion of AI, because you can lead into this with something that everyone's interested in right now. Everyone wants Copilot and they want to talk about AI, but the security that underpins it is so crucial that it's a conversation starter, and it's a bit of leverage for organizations who want this technology in place, but they've been delaying having that security discussion for a long time because they perceive it as something they can put off. They have more priorities to spend budget on. So So it's become easier to talk about in recent times for sure.
I think it's easier to understand from some, like my perspective. I would be considered a user, I suppose, in the business, and as a user, forgetting anything I know about technology, I kind of understand the things. I use multi-factor authentication, and there's things that I recognise now that maybe you wouldn't have previously. So it's sort of easier to understand, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, it does, definitely. And Microsoft have worked very hard in the last few years to make their security products very much more user aware, like that data loss prevention policy. As a user, what you would see there is a little sort of yellow bar at the top of your Word as you're typing something, and it'll pop up with a little tip saying, you've got a credit card in this number in this document. Are you sure you want to do this? Yes or no? And if you want to proceed, you have to type in a little justification, which is, yeah, I know I'm doing this, and this is the reason why. And then that's recorded and audited, so admins can go back and search for that decision. So, and then guidance on when and how to apply those labels to encrypt documents. So it's getting a lot easier. And tools like Copilot are just going to help with that, because and really, I can't encourage enough, if you've got access to Microsoft Copilot or Bing Chat Enterprise, as it was known, I never go to Google anymore to search for stuff. As I said, it's just so much. It can do so much more for you and get so much great information there. But there is always the caveat that it's not guaranteed that what AI looks for and presents back to you is going to be genuine. But so do your homework as part of that. But and it's only going to get better. We're still really in the infancy of this age. So what it can already do, it's scary to think how far it can go in the next few weeks, months, and years. So exciting to see what's around the corner. And I just RSVP to a Microsoft event in a few weeks' time in London, which I'm going to go down to, and there's more to come, more shiny, new, exciting announcements apparently. So can't wait to see what they've got next for us.
Yeah, I don't think you can always trust Google either, can you?
No, so true, so true.
It's
well, it's
all
like Wikipedia
stuff.
Yeah, Wikipedia is the same. I mean, anyone can edit a Wikipedia article, so it's it's not the gospel of truth. It really isn't.
And I think it's good as well to practice with prompts.
Definitely.
Again, sort of using Copilot, I've certainly started doing it. My resistance is lowering to using AI to, Gen AI to do things. And it's like, I quite like creating the prompt that reflects maybe the way I would do something, rather than
really cool, isn't it? Yeah, really cool. And just one last thing, actually, while I remember, is in the presentation, which again I'll share with you, some of the little cartoony images that I had on the right hand side of some of the slides. I created all of those with AI. Designer.microsoft.com. If you've not explored it, go and take a look, because it's super cool, the stuff you can make there, and type in what you want, and in a couple of seconds, boom, there's some images for you to choose from. It's incredible.
Yeah, it's great, isn't it?
Yeah.
But yeah, no, thanks so much for today, Peter. It's been a real treat having you on. So thanks for agreeing. We've got a couple of people left in. Is there anyone with any final comments before we close off? I thought Craig was going to speak to us then.
Yeah, I'm just about to say something. I think what you've just touched on, Peter, the conversation you've just had about AI it's something that's worried me for a while, is that we might be creating a microgeneration of people who just rely on what they get told from artificial intelligence engines, because that's all they're used to.
Yeah.
We still need the human element correcting, verifying what's coming out of these engines. And equally, what they're being fed, some of them are being fed erroneous content. So, we still, I think, need the human element to check what's coming out is correct. Vaguely worried we're going to have a generation of people that will just sit on their phone and rely on what's coming out of it as gospel.
Agreed. Yeah.
We need to fix that as an industry somehow. Not quite sure how, but we have to. Yeah,
hopefully that'll evolve over time. I know it's something that a lot of people in our industry are concerned about, and thankfully there are a number of strong voices out there who are speaking to it. Hopefully it'll find its way. I like to try and have faith, but I'm always AI I'm cautious. I'm always cautious about what comes. At the very beginning of this, I was much like Sarah. I was like, I'm not sure about this. But then when I saw it was generative and it wasn't going to become sentient, I thought, oh, okay, I can see that at this stage, I don't think I have to be worried about it taking over. But I take your point, Craig, very seriously, that it can be misused and over relied on, and I worry about that greatly as well. So it'll be interesting to see where it goes and how that can be taken into account.
Yeah, we've had a couple of people in our organisation just literally cut and paste code that it's generated, and then they've raised help desk tickets to say this code doesn't work. You know,
That's
it
incredible.
comes back to us that to try and fix these things. So, you know, these are the kind of levels of governance that we need to figure out. But anyway, great session. Enjoyed that. It was very succinct, very clear.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Nice to meet you, Craig.
Good to have you back, Craig.
Thank
After
you.
dogs and COVID and whatever else happened over the summer.
Yeah,
great to see you.
Funny few months, but yeah.
Thank you so much, everyone. Lovely to meet you all, and thanks for having me. Take care.
Thanks. Take care.
Bye bye.